Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear viewers, Assalamu alaikum. You are watching Foresight and I'm your host Faisal Raza Khan. Viewers, UN turned 78. It's with at least 190 members or more than 190 members. It's a huge organization or a global organization. Basic theme of its inception soon after the World War II was to preserve peace across the globe, to encourage development, along with that avoid conflicts, and also to end atrocities, human rights violations, and even to protect human rights across the country, across the globe. So United Nations has a larger role, but unfortunately today United Nations failed in lots of aspects. Particularly, two of the very prime examples are Palestine and Kashmir. These are the issues from the last 75 years, unsettled, unfortunately, but justified as it is according to the UN resolutions. These are the issues which must have to be settled. But unfortunately, those resolutions were overlooked even by the United Nations itself. Even today, the world is in crisis, like climate change, like global conflicts are on rise, like we have seen today Ukraine crisis, along with that the Kashmir crisis, and today the Gaza crisis. But unfortunately, when we are going through the United Nations system, United Nations Security Council is the largest body which can implement its decision at once. But unfortunately, big powers has the veto power, and most of the time they use it for their allies rather than for the humanity. UN General Assembly meeting every year and having lots of speeches, lots of addresses, policy decisions, committees and all that, and still a session is going on. But the decision making of the UNGA is not implementable. It is up to the countries to implement the decisions. So there are lots of problems. UN is under severe pressure particularly from the P5 countries. UN Security Council reforms are at question right now. So on all these topics we are going to discuss with our panelists. Within studio we have Saira Ijaz. She is an international relations expert. Along with her, Brigadier Hamid Rashid. He is also international foreign relations expert. And on this particular topic we are having the first question to Brigadier Saab. Brigadier Saab, how do you see particularly the role of the UN, because the leaders after World War I have something in mind which was actually to avoid global conflicts, atrocities, genocide, but we have seen that these are on rise, particularly when we are going through the Gaza crisis.
Before commenting on UN, we must know what was the history of that. They moved from League of Nations. After First World War, it was the League of Nations which failed actually that the Second World War should not take place. So when the United Nations was created and established, the first thing in mind was the global peace and security. But later on, what we see over a period of 75 years, they have been instrumental in giving humanitarian assistance to the people in need, in distress, and also going for certain subsets of their parties and their councils for human rights also, for education, for science, and for climatic change also. But now the question is the efficacy of the United Nations, and what we see that there are double standards. It is not that it is a story of failures only. There are few successes also. Look at the Kosovo. That is I am going to highlight. Kosovo, East Timor, South Sudan. But when it comes to the miseries of the Muslim and Gaza and Kashmir, we don't see any will of the United Nations. And now how do the United Nations work? It is through the international law. Actually, the charter with the United Nations Security Council is that they have to implement the international laws either by the sanctions or by the force or by deploying the peacekeepers. We see that peacekeepers are there in Kashmir, but they are not basically going to stop Indians from the atrocities. They are observer group, but all those powers given by the United Nations, Indians don't pay any heed to that. And when we come to Gaza, it is a blatant act of aggression by Israel, and Palestinians are at the receiving end. And at the United Nations Security Council, we are just seeing the veto by one power and then veto by America again and again. Now, the Security Council itself, what we see that the permanent members, that is the P5, they have given a right that, as you already alluded to, that they are only protecting their allies, they are only protecting their strategic interest instead of going for the human rights plight and sufferings. They are not focused on that, and they are only focused on their allies, their own interest. Until that time, they don't pay any heed to the human suffering, and they don't pay heed to the international law, and they use their veto power with pragmatically and with prudence. I think UN will not be a story of success.
Yeah, definitely it is. Sarah, if you just go through the 78 years of the United Nations, do you think there are some successes? Because there are some successes, but they are not much notable. So when we are talking about United Nations, it is important to note that the crisis which must have to end in a 21st century, they are still going on, and unfortunate is that they are not paying much heed to them.
Actually, by taking forward point of made by Brigadier Saab, I would say that see a basic flaw in the making of the this whole structure. When there are special rights were given to some special powerful states to ensure their participation. And when, as one of the scholars said, that if the US did not get what it sought, then the future of the leagues of the nation would be the same. That is the debt on the floor of the United States Senate. So I think there are certain flaws, certain basic flaws in the formation of this body. And again, somehow today I may be feeling a bit pessimistic, and after watching the miseries right in the morning on the front page of all the leading newspapers of the death and the misery and the killings of Palestinians, I would say human beings, no matter what, whether they are Muslims or whether they are Palestinians or Israelis, killing of human beings is so heartening, it's so depressing that it's breaking your trust in humanity. So I think that there are basic flaws, and see what is the main vision behind the formation of this universal or the international body. That is not only to maintain cooperation and to ensure cooperation, but to maintain international peace and to resolve the issues of the states. And all the states, initially there were few states, then later on all the states in the world joined this body, and it was the agenda and it was the vision of the UN to ensure and to protect and to raise voice against all the states, irrespective of their ideology, irrespective of their type of power or the type of political system and their interests. But alas, we have seen, and again I would also like to mention here, just look at the ideology or the system behind the 5 powers having veto.
You are stressing a lot about P5. So, Brigadier, do you think that the UN apparent failure looks like that it is because of the funding of the developed countries that actually gearing up or maintaining the direction of the United Nations, or it's P5 because they are the powerful countries, the developed world wants that their rights must have to be intact rather than the developing world? What's the reason behind why United Nations is not going through what its charter says?
In simple words, it is the geopolitical narrative, imperatives and dynamics, and also with that is the strategic interest. As far as funding is concerned, every institution, global or regional, needs certain secretariat to be there, and funding is by part of the influence you have on that organization. But actually the P5, as already highlighted, that its foundation or formation has the problem in itself. With the veto power, what Pakistan is basically saying, that it should be inclusive of all the region, equitable, that
it must have to be balanced.
It has to be balanced. When inclusivity will be there, when it will be equitable, balance has to be there by its generic body. That's it. What we see, as you all highlighted, that UN Assembly, it is a town hall where everybody comes, share its views and goes by, nobody pays any heed. But on the other hand, Security Council is a force, and it is also a mandate to reckon with, because it has the powers to lay down sanctions. Iran is the example in front of you. On the other hand, Israel, nobody is paying any heed. There are no sanction about Israel, no sanction about India. The human rights violations are more in Iran or in Israel or in Palestine is suffering, or Kashmiri people are suffering more human rights violations.
Definitely, very valid point, Brigadier Sahab. We welcome Dr. Wasim Ishaq also. He is online with us. Most welcome to you, Dr. Sahab. Dr. Sahab, we are discussing, you know, the United Nations has a very pivotal role in maintaining peace, tranquility, stability across the world. But unfortunately, we have seen over the years, the current example is Gaza. Unfortunately, whatever the atrocities, hostilities at the hand of Israel right now. But we have seen that when it comes to the Muslim world, prime example is East Timor, then you have Sudan. The solution comes overnight. But unfortunately, when it comes to the Muslims who are in suppression, who are in oppression, and the oppressor state is always have lots of leverages at the hand of big powers, and United Nations is completely silent on those aspects. Particularly, I am talking about Palestine and Kashmir.
Thank you very much for a very good and productive question. I would like to comment a few lines on the previous question which was asked from the honorable panelists. I think the purpose of creation of the United Nations, we have to keep in mind that it was actually established after the Second World War, and what was happening at the end of Second World War, that League of Nations had almost finished, and we have seen death and devastation, and the entire infrastructure was destroyed in Europe, in Soviet Union, in China, in Japan, and in the almost entire East Asia. So at that time, when the United Nations was created, the preamble of the United Nations says that to prevent the world from the scores of another world war. So from that perspective, after Second World War, we have not seen any Third World War. So this is a quantifiable success rate for the creation of United Nations. While when the League of Nations was formed, we have seen First World War and Second World War. While after the formation of United Nations, we have not seen Third World War. So this is the positive side of the issue. The negative side of the issue. The P5 who were the victors of Second World War, they all are the permanent members, and they actually formulated the international system which is existing even till today. It is all Western dominated, led by the United States and the Europeans. But they were the victors of Second World War. Germany, despite it was defeated, but today Germany's stature being part of European Union is just like all of the P5. So therefore, the structural issues, but we also have to keep in mind that we belong to a realist paradigm of the world, which means the domination through power. So domination through power, those which are industrialized, which are militarily, they have a better arsenal, and also economically they are very strong. So they all are, majority of those in fact lie in the Europe as well as the United States. So from that perspective, they are dictating so-called rule-based international order and rule-based Indo-Pacific. We have been listening a lot since President Trump's time. So what is happening today, that rule-based international order has a different perception and different meanings for the Europeans and the Westerns, while it has absolutely different connotations for the Asians and African and other Muslim countries. So what is happening now? On two accounts, I would say that it has
the rule-based order is different for the developed world and it is different for the developing world particularly, and it is apparent right now. Brigadier Sahab, when we are talking about UN Security Council reforms, and Pakistan along with the United for Consensus, Italy and all other countries, they want that it must have to be inclusive, balanced and indiscriminate. Rather, on the other hand, G4 stressing upon that they are the allies of the big powers and they have every right to have the permanent seat. So what do you see about the United Nations Security Council's expansion at the hand of big powers rather than basically based upon tranquility, balance and all that? Okay, Brigadier Sahab, how? Yeah, definitely. Why not? Why not? Please.
What we see that the stance of the Group 4, that is basically India, Brazil, Japan and Germany, they want their inclusion in the permanent seat.
Yes.
That is P5.
P5. Yeah.
Whereas for United for Consensus, that is Pakistan,
it is basically
Turkey
the expansion
and
to the veto power.
They don't want actually expansion of P4, 5. they want that the expansion of the elected members, that they should be increased from
50
10 to 20.
non-permanent seats.
That non-permanent seat, and these are basically elected from the General Assembly members. When you will have more members in the Security Council, there will be certain democratic mindset. Presently, what we see that veto powers give them anarchic power, that whatever they feel at will, they can decide. They cannot let people decide what is actually the right, because what we have seen in America now, as far as the Palestinian miseries are concerned, when 2 resolution was tabled in Security Council, America just vetoed it without any logic.
It is unfortunate. It is unfortunate. We have seen most of the time
now,
such.
This is what I want to highlight. This is the difference between Group 4 and as far as Pakistan viewpoint is concerned. Pakistan wants Security Council to be effective by being balanced. More democratic, balanced, equitable. That, as you said, indiscriminate. It should not be the regional hegemony. Are the only great economies or bigger economies or bigger powers are made part of it. It should be inclusive of all the members, so that when there is an issue of the global security, all members, they feel their responsibility. And as far as the weaker nations are concerned, their voice is also heard. And it can only be heard when its body is expanded with certain mandate also. But at present, what we see, that the Muslims, if they are the multipolarity while moving it, I think now the veto power has also become a blessing, because America is going to have certain actions, though China or Russia is going to balance it.
Definitely it is. And Sarah, when we are talking about United Nations, how do you see that particular, because we have observed that UN Secretary General, the President of the UNGA, General Assembly, they have a very little say, although they are making lots of statements, but those are ineffective to the kind that most of the times most of the world community not paying much heed to it.
Again, the point is the same, that lack of democratic mechanism and how the organization works. It's flawed. And again, I would also like to add here is that there is also lack of mechanism to influence the judiciary of the International Court of Justice. And since there is no global world system, there is no world order or a world government where that court can, impose and can push those nations and states to obey its order and to obey the humanitarian related issues and the decisions made by the International Court of Justice. And in the last 75 years, we have not seen any such move to even to start work on such issues, to make the relevant and effective the International Court of Justice, and to have some collaboration and to have some mechanism where the UN can influence or can make the ICJ more relevant.
Definitely. Dr. Saab, when we are talking about the successes and failures of the United Nations, there are lots of issues going on, like if the refugee convention is there, but unfortunately the implementation is not there. If refugees are, the influx is there in some territory, there's Pakistan is from the last 40 years hosting Afghan refugees, but unfortunately UN failed to reckon with. And the second one is that, like law of seas, if some sort of sovereignty or some sort of jurisdiction given to any country, but what about the ecological disasters and what about the overfishing and all other things? So there are lots of loopholes within the UN system and UN based order. We are talking a lot about the international order, but that is primarily based upon the developed world rather than UN based order.
I think there's a dire need for UN reforms. It is far, far overdue. And UN itself has also tried for comprehensive actions. And let me also quote Lakhdar Brahimi, who was the ex-UN Secretary General. There is a Lakhdar Brahimi report on UN reforms. He made a lot of work in all dimensions, and he has suggested that is still available even on the net. This has actually given an overarching concept how to actually do a reorganization of the Security Council, how to do the different peace missions under Chapter 6 and Chapter 7, and how other UN organizations should be able to function. But unfortunately, none of those things, none of his recommendations have ever been applied. Now, as a result, we are now passing through a stage of stalemate where the United Nations is presenting itself just as a very benign sort of office. And as a result, what we have seen just yesterday and day before yesterday, the Israeli ambassador, this is unprecedented in the history of United Nations 75 years, that Israeli ambassador has publicly bashed the Secretary General who was sitting right in front, and later on that Secretary General has to do yet another press conference to
And
clarify.
Doctor demanded resignation. Israel demanded resignation soon after UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' speech in the United Nations Security Council.
Exactly. So this is the dilemma of, and this is how the credibility of the United Nations Secretary General, who is the head of the organization, has been seen. It has been declining over a period of time, and now it has reached to its climax. So I would rather argue that there is a dire need, sooner rather than later, that we must pursue the process of reforms agenda. And in that case, we, Pakistan, at our level, we have a permanent mission in the United Nations. We, along with the China and Russia and other Muslim countries, or maybe the global South countries, join hands together and let's table another resolution, or at least during the General Assembly sessions, annual sessions, or other frequent sessions, we must continue to voice our concerns on the imbalance which has been created by the disrepresentation or disproportionate overrepresentation of the European countries, which as a result has made its organization almost dysfunctional. Although UN has, coming to directly to your question, UN has its organ as UNHCR for looking after the refugees, etc., and settlement of refugees, but it has the capacity issues. And then above all, the maximum funding is being given by the United States and the European countries. While the other countries of the Asia, like the Russia and China, when they would come and supplement their resources so that some of the resources of the European countries, even if not provided, can be supplemented from the China or Russia or together from the Gulf countries, then probably the indispensability of European partners and the United States would erode to some extent, and then rise of rest would take power at the center stage in the Security Council, and then they would be able to, they would be in a position to really implement those resolutions which they have already passed.
So what about the trade wars going on, this economic crunch, economic crisis, over the pandemics and all others? When we see lots of organizations are there, but unfortunately the mechanisms are not working properly. Some of the dominant states are always there to dominate United Nations, and developing world is just foreseeing that when United Nations implements its own resolutions.
This is the dilemma of functioning of United Nations at this point in time. But if we just go back to 1945, probably the situation would be clear that all those who were victors, they try to set the rules of international order as per their desire. And this is what have been refined over a period of time just to serve their own interests. So that's why I'm emphasizing that it is right about time now that we must initiate a process with the like-minded countries, and maybe by the lead role by China, it has veto power, it's a permanent member of Security Council, and also Russia. And then we need to pursue this desire of reforms at the Security Council and overall reforms of the United Nations in light of Brahmi report as soon as possible.
So why there is, when we are talking about overall breakdown of the cooperation at the international level, Ukraine on one side, Palestine on the other side, Kashmir, which is questionable from the last 78 years. Unfortunately, there is UN has never ever shown much concerns except two reports of the United Nations Human Rights Council, Human Rights Commission in 2018 and 2019, and soon after there is nothing on the human rights violation, and a grave human rights violation in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And big powers always encouraged right now the Modi regime, which is doing every atrocity and genocide in Kashmir, but UN is nowhere.
I think we need to understand that those UN missions have been employed under which mandate. Chapter 6 is for the peacemaking and Chapter 7 is for peace enforcement. None of these missions are under Chapter 7. We have seen where Chapter 7 was employed, for instance, in case of South Sudan, for example, in case of the Yugoslavian war, and also partly in case of East Timor. And we have also seen its partial employment in terms of Kosovo. So there are success stories where Chapter 7 was employed, but the Palestine, Kashmir is all under Chapter 6. So unless this mandate is again revised, but in the prevailing environments, I don't think so that somebody is going to revise this mandate. So, and secondly, the US National Security Strategy of 2017, as well as Joe Biden's National Security Strategy of September 2022, they have given a huge status to India for South Asia, and also in terms of its utility against containment of China, which is their pivot to Asia strategy launched since 2012. And we have now seen it has been refined further into Indo-Pacific strategy. Then we've seen quadrilateral alliance and trilateral alliance and AQUAS alliance. So all these things where India's stature has grown to a large extent in front of the eyes of United States and their European allies. So therefore, India, just like Israel, is also given a free hand to do whatever they want inside Kashmir, despite that they have disregarded all the UN resolutions which are already approved, and we have an unmogib system over here. They are daily reporting, but their mandate is absolutely limited. So unless that mandate is revised, probably the status quo would prevail.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saab. Barri Saab, how do you see that particular phenomena or a question which the world community is asking time and again, that United Nations was created by the West, it is for the West, and it is working for them only, and rest of the world is in isolation. How do you see that?
I don't fully agree with that, because there are some successes of the United Nations also. We must acknowledge when we talk about the humanitarian assistance, peacekeeping operations in Africa,
poverty eradication to some extent,
about education, about science, about heritage. But on the other hand, when it comes to the human rights, there are about more than 70 treaties on human rights and 30 articles of the human rights, but implementation is missing. Actually, it is not the mandate, it is the implementation. Definitely. And for that, I will fully agree with you that when it comes to implementation, it is for the West, and it is only for the interest of the West. And there is no ideology, there is no race, there is no creed, no religion in United Nations, but at the same time, what is the fact is it is only the miseries of the Muslim which we see.
What about International Criminal Court and International Court of Justice, what they are doing, because they have some sort of mandate when we are talking about United Nations Security Council. So why they are mum, and why they are not, United Nations Security Council is not using effectively its own operatives?
Again, that is very selective as far as the Criminal Court of Justice is concerned. What we see that the African warlords, they were tried, they were punished. When it comes to the Indian and Israelis, there is no case about them. Nobody is discussing that these human rights violations should also be on the bench of those International Criminal Court. But this is actually the double standards.
Even the Croats and Yugoslavs, it was Yugoslavia earlier on when it was the crisis of Bosnia-Herzegovina. Those generals were tried after a long time. It has taken at least years and years to try them in
about a decade, almost about a decade they were tried. This is what I am highlighting. These are the double standards. But what we see, the silver lining, that world is moving now multipolarity. Now the regional organization like BRF and SCO, they are taking some shape, they are getting some muscles. And what we see that like League of Nations, if United Nations doesn't transform to address to the issues like Kashmir, like Palestine, like Ukraine also, it will also have the same fate as that of League of Nations, because now people, they are losing hopes. And with, I think if this United Nations Security Council is not expanded, and that too I would like to advocate the viewpoint of the Unity for Consensus, that it should be broader forum where people and countries should be elected, okay, not for 2 years, for more than 4 years also, and should be re-elected also.
Definitely, your point well taken, Sarah. If we talk about United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, once there was a Paris Agreement, and there were lots of things which were agreed by the developed world, particularly to reduce carbon emissions, to support those developing countries who are vulnerable, or they are facing huge catastrophes and disaster at the hand of climate change and environmental degradation. So this is still implementable. We haven't seen any sort of global climate fund or the green climate fund or something like that, and to encourage developing world. Why is it so? Why it was created by United Nations? No implementation again.
Again, where there is money is involved, you know, the things work differently. It is all about the international organizations, international companies having, what's the problem with the Israelis? Because Israel's Israeli and many Jewish people control the entire economy of the US. And that's why US has to support, you know, Israel.
And US is the larger financial backer, supporter of the United Nations.
Yeah.
So these are the
So these are the, when you just connect the dots, then the things are very clear, you know, things are very easy to understand. It's all a matter of, you know, economy, it's all a matter of money. So when it will, but the same voices, even the Obama once said that climate change is there. Now it's a reality, it's an emergency, it's a slow emergency in which the entire humanity is right now in. So, but again, that's the dilemma of the humanity, that's the dilemma of the human beings. Until and it's not with me in my home, with my kids, in my home, I will not bother, and I am least interested about the well-being or the, you know, welfare of the poor people or the developing nations. So that's the case. It's all the economic aspect is the key issue of that. And in addition to it, again, the UN failure is also when it comes to address the inequalities, power inequalities. It was intended to make, to do work where the rules, not the raw power, mattered the most. And where, and it has to incorporate and it has to make some mechanism to, you know, address the issue of power inequalities.
Definitely. Dr. Wasim, when United Nations, we are talking a lot about its failures, but there are lots of successes as well of the United Nations, though those successes are minimal, but there are. So how do you see that part of United Nations?
Let me say that the UN successes are not minimal, they are quite a few. For example, when we say, its preamble says that to prevent the world from scores of war means Third World War. So right away we can say that there has never been Third World War in the last 75 years. But there have been small wars. For example, Korean War 50s, Vietnam War 60s, First Gulf War, Second Gulf War, then Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, etc. All these wars were restricted to a particular theater, and then those were contained. We also have seen a period of Cold War, not a hot war, between United States and Soviet Union, because there was an international system which was in place, and this is the credibility of that international system, that it prevented wars one from happening, and when those happened, those were actually consolidated between 5 to 6 years of period, and then there have been a stability operations. And we have seen by and large, and especially the ASEAN region, which was absolutely devastated as a result of Second World War because of the Imperial Japan's actions. Those were actually rebuilt through another Marshall Plan, and that Marshall Plan came under the flag of United Nations. Marshall Plan in Europe and Marshall Plan in ASEAN region, and maybe we can say Japan and China and Korea as well. So these are those success stories, and thereafter, as we fast forward in today's environment, I think two aspects, climate change and non-traditional security, anti-piracy operations, disaster relief operations, there has been absolute unanimous amongst all the countries of whether the Security Council or the General Assembly. There has been a considerable amount of funding also. There has been a very successful summits which are held, and a lot of actions have been taken. For instance, China has been back in 2014 and 15, largest producer of greenhouse emissions. But today, China has contained it to a large extent by way of self-discipline and self-implementation and commitments they made to those summits. And so now we are actually seeing a greater degree of cooperation at the world level, and the coordinating agency is the United Nations. So from all these examples,
Dr. do you perceive, or do you think that it's UN body itself which is going to which has to implement all its decision making, or the big powers who intend to be the hegemon are going to be the decision makers ultimately?
United Nations works through its agencies, and all such organizations are already in place. The representation within those organizations is again distributed as per the seats of the Security Council. So certainly the United States and the European countries have got more representations as compared to the countries of Global South and other developing countries. So in that case, the imbalance is available even on those organization levels. That's why ICJ has so far indicted all the Yugoslavian leaders very successfully. They have indicted almost all the African warlords very successfully, but it has nothing to say about the atrocities of Israel of last 75 years.
So
this is the dilemma.
what about the US invasion to Iraq and then to Afghanistan and lots of other countries, because no one tried in the International Court of Justice from United States or any Western country?
This is yet another classic example of contemporary times. When President Bush was invading Iraq, he had given an ultimatum to the United Nations by saying, quote unquote, that your relevance will be judged in times to come. So hardly 20 years ago, the United Nations, even relevance was question marked by the sitting president of the United States. And what we have seen, that neither the weapons of mass destruction were found from Iraq, but the kind of death and devastation and infrastructure losses and human losses which were created, nobody was indicted. So they all are above law in the International Court of Justice as well. So this is how I said in the beginning that we live in a realist paradigm which says in the power politics and domination through power. So unfortunately, today the United States is a unipolar power. Tomorrow maybe some other power centers comes up. That polarity would keep shifting. So would be the behavior of the United Nations as well as its associated agencies.
So what about, Brigadier Sahib, about the multipolar world, because it is all about, because most of the countries are supporting this multipolar phenomena, but unfortunately some of the powers, including United States, wants that unipolar world must have to be intact, and that's why United Nations is unable to perform. So how do you see this phenomena or this theme?
This is taking into shape, the multipolarity. Few days before there was BRF, and what is actually being projected by China and Russia is the multipolarity, because the forum itself and what have been the
by the way, GDPR is also portraying like that.
What has been statement there and the 8 points given by the Chinese president, it is basically the shape of the new world order. What they want, inclusivity. Pakistan also want inclusivity, and they also want equitable world for all. And what we see, the contours of the multipolarity, that world will be more secure, more peaceful, and at the same more equitable. The unipolarity has basically led to the destabilization, as we already highlighted by Dr. Wasim, that there was no prosecution of the American generals. Why? Might is right. It has been the law of jungle when prehistoric eras, and it's still prevalent 2023. But when the International Criminal Court will move from Hague to Beijing or to Moscow, the outcome will be different. And we have to wait and see, because now everybody, the weaker nations, they also realize that they need to be inclusive of a global system where their voice is heard, where there is a fair play, where there is a fair world also. And I think, being optimistic, we should see that in next 5 to 10 years, the multipolarity will take its shape. The great powers, they may be robbed of their veto power either in the United Nations Security Council, or the United Nations has the same fate as that of League of Nations.
Sara, what do you see about rights for all, equality and all others, because these are the beautiful words but unfortunately not implemented much. So in the framework of United Nations, how do you see, because according to the Charter, every country is sovereign, their integrity, their sovereignty must have to be intact, but everyone has the right to vote. But the problem is that in United Nations, it is always about hegemon. So what about equality, human rights and all that?
That's the real challenge for this international body, where apparently all the nations are there, are present, are very much present there, but they are not heard. And that's the reality, and every Muslim world, Arab world, and now this, I think this recent crisis, we have spoken about the advantages and everything, but for me, the eruption of this Gaza conflict and this war rather exposed the, entire this farce of international body representing all the nations and sitting and protecting the rights of less powerful states. I think that's not the case.
Okay. Brigadier sir, very brief, if you just elaborate, can the world afford the complete failure of the United Nations?
Not at all, presently, because it is the only international body which is ensuring some peace and averting the world from the third war. So, till the time multipolarity does not take its full shape and new world order is almost prevalent in the world, we have to live with the United Nations, and we must pray that it remain intact.
So, thank you very much Brigadier Hamid Rashid, thank you very much for your presence in the studio along with Sara Ijaz. Thank you very much for being here, and also Dr. Wasim Ishaq online. Thank you very much Dr. Saab for being with us in the program. Thank you very much, so nice of you. And viewers, you all know that United Nations organization is the only organization which has the global stature, and though there are lots of failures and lots of successes as well, but the complete failure of this international global organization is not in favor of, particularly in favor of the developing world. It has, according to our panelists, it has protected, it has preserved many countries for going all out war and protect humanity from the Third World War. It is very important. We have to make these efforts for the to strengthen this United Nations, and along with that UN system must have to come forward to take shape, otherwise it would be a complete disaster. This was today's Foresight, and it's time to sign off. Allah Hafiz Nasir.